Hello everyone, welcome to Bit of Anatomy. In this tutorial, we'll see the features, attachments and site determination of humerus. Humerus is a long bone, so it is the longest and largest bone that is present in the upper limb. So it is the bone of the arm region. So similar to any other long bone, it contains an upper end, a shaft and a lower end. So first if we try to identify the side of the bone, so in the upper end there is a head which should be directed medially, and in the lower end there are two epicondyles on either sides. One of them is prominent, which is the medial epicondyle. So in anatomical position, the head of the humerus to be medial and the epicondyle should be medial, or the prominent epicondyle should be directed medial. So this is the left-sided humerus part. So coming to the features of the upper end. So the upper end contains an head. So it contains a small separation between the head and the remaining part of the upper end, which is called as the anatomical neck. And there is a part which separates the upper end from the shaft, which is called as the surgical neck part. So this head of the humerus, it is spheroidal in shape or ovoidal in shape, and it articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula to form the shoulder joint. It presents two tubercles, so one in the anterior aspect, so which is called as lesser tubercle, and one which extends into the posterior aspect, which is quite larger, called as greater tubercle. So this lesser tubercle, it receives the insertion of subscapularis muscle. Over the greater tubercle, there will be three impressions which receives the insertion of supraspinatus, infraspinatus and teres minor muscle. So this is called as insertion of sit muscle, supra, infra and teres minor. So in between the two tubercles, there is a groove called as intertubercular sulcus, because it is present between the two tubercles, or it is also called as bicipital groove, since the tendon of long head of biceps brachii passes through this. So bridging the two, there is a ligament extending from lesser tubercle to the greater tubercle called as transverse humeral ligament. So there are various parts of the intertubercular sulcus: the medial lip, the lateral lip and the floor. The medial lip receives the insertion of teres major, lateral lip receives the insertion of pectoralis major, whereas floor receives the insertion of latissimus dorsi. So hence there is a mnemonic for this called as lady between two majors. And the surgical neck of the humerus, it is related to axillary nerve, anterior and posterior circumflex humeral vessels part. So these are features of the upper end. So if you appreciate the features of the shaft of the humerus, shaft is somewhat rounded in the upper part, and it is triangular on cross section in the lower part. So it has got three borders and three surfaces: an anterior, a medial and a lateral border, and three surfaces: a posterior surface, anteromedial surface between the anterior border and the medial border, anterolateral surface between the lateral border and the anterior border. Remember, the borders are not very prominent in the upper part, except the anterior border which extends from the greater tubercle, and the surfaces demarcation is very poor in the upper part because of the poor margins. Only in the lower part we can appreciate the prominent borders. So this medial border in the lower part, it becomes a prominent projection called as medial supracondylar ridge. Similarly, in the lateral part there is lateral supracondylar ridge. So if you see near the lateral border or in the anterolateral surface, there is this prominent roughened area, so which is almost V-shaped. So this is called as deltoid tuberosity. So as the name suggests, it receives the insertion of the deltoid muscle part. Whereas over the medial border in the central part, so there is a small roughened area almost in the middle, so which receives the insertion of coracobrachialis muscle part. So if you see the other insertions in the lower part of the bone, so there are two surfaces here, the anterolateral and the anteromedial surface. Both of them, they provide origin to the brachialis muscle. Whereas if we turn posteriorly, So this posterior surface, so this provides origin to medial head of the triceps brachii, and just above this there is a small groove which cuts the lateral border, so which is known as radial groove. So this radial groove, there are two structures passing through the radial groove, the radial nerve and profunda brachii vessels. So above this part provides origin to the lateral head of triceps. So the posterior surface, there is medial head of the triceps and lateral head of triceps brachii muscle part. So these are the major muscular attachments to the shaft of the humerus. If you see the features of the lower end, so there are articulating and non-articulating parts. So from the medial to lateral side, if you appreciate, there is a prominent medial epicondyle. Next there is prominent trochlea, capitulum, and somewhat less prominent the lateral epicondyle. And just above this trochlea, there is a depression called as coronoid fossa, and above the capitulum, a depression called as radial fossa. So if you see the posterior part, above the trochlea, there is a large depression called as olecranon fossa. And on either side, just above the medial epicondyle, there is medial supracondylar ridge and lateral supracondylar ridge over the lateral side. So this medial supracondylar ridge, it provides origin to the humeral head of pronator teres, and the medial epicondyle, it provides origin to all the superficial flexor muscles of the forearm. If you see the trochlea, so this part is the trochlea part, so it contains two pulli. One is the medial pulley and one is the lateral pulley. As you can appreciate, the medial pulley, it is quite larger when compared to the lateral pulley. So this trochlea, it is present over the anterior aspect, over the inferior aspect, and also over the posterior aspect. So it articulates with the trochlear notch of the ulna, forming a part of the elbow joint. Because of this variation in the length of the medial pulley and the lateral pulley, it results in carrying angle of the forearm. And the capitulum, so it is the rounded articulating surface, so it is present in the anterior and the inferior, but it is deficient in the posterior aspect. So this capitulum, it articulates with the head of the radius, forming the lateral part of the elbow joint. The coronoid fossa, which is present just above the trochlea, it lodges the coronoid process of the ulna when the elbow is flexed. The radial fossa, which is present above the capitulum, it lodges the head of the radius during flexion of the elbow. The lateral epicondyle, so it provides common origin to superficial extensor muscles of the forearm, and the lateral supracondylar ridge provides origin to the brachioradialis, the extensor carpi radialis longus, and the brevis muscle. The posterior surface of the lateral epicondyle, it provides origin to the anconeus muscle. And in the posterior part, this olecranon fossa, so it lodges the olecranon process of the ulna when the forearm is in extended position. So these are features of the lower end of humerus. To summarize, humerus has got two ends, an upper end and a lower end, and a intervening shaft. So the upper end contains head of the humerus, which articulates with the glenoid cavity to form shoulder joint. It has got two necks, the anatomical neck and the surgical neck. Surgical neck is related to axillary nerve and circumflex humeral vessels. There is one more neck called as morphological neck, which is present between the metaphysis and the shaft of the humerus. So it has got two tubercles, the lesser tubercle and a greater tubercle. Lesser tubercle receives the insertion of subscapularis, greater tubercle receives the insertion of sit muscles, that is supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. In between the two, there is intertubercular sulcus through which the tendon of long head of biceps brachii will pass. So the medial lip of the sulcus receives the insertion of teres major, lateral lip receives the insertion of pectoralis major, and the floor receives the insertion of the latissimus dorsi. So bridging the two tubercles, there is a ligament called as transverse humeral ligament. So in the shaft, there is deltoid tuberosity, which receives the insertion of deltoid muscle, a small roughened area in the middle of the medial border where coracobrachialis is inserted. So this part provides origin to the brachialis muscle. In the posterior surface, there is origin of medial head of triceps, the lateral head of triceps, and in between the two there is the radial groove through which the radial nerve and profunda brachii vessels will pass. In the lower end, medial epicondyle, trochlea, capitulum and lateral epicondyle, two fossa anteriorly, coronoid and radial fossa, one posteriorly, olecranon fossa. And in the posterior surface of this medial epicondyle, there is one more nerve related, the ulnar nerve. So altogether there are three nerves related to the humerus: axillary nerve, the radial nerve and the ulnar nerve part. So these are the nerves related to the humerus. So if you see the joints formed by humerus, the upper end forms the shoulder joint, whereas in the lower end the trochlea forms a joint with the ulna and the capitulum forms a joint with the head of the radius. So altogether this lower end forms the elbow joint. So these are the salient features of humerus. To see more such videos, kindly subscribe to the channel. Thank you.